This is Matt Harris with Varato, and today we have Jason Nyhus with Shopware to tell us about Shopware and B2B eCommerce and digital transformation and all the good stuff we love to talk about at Varato. So welcome, Jason.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah. So Jason, we know a little bit about Shopware. I don't think we know a ton about you. Why don't you just give us the rundown, maybe a little bit about your background and how you got into this space, and then we'll jump into Shopware.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Jason Nyhus. I'm general manager here at Shopware. I've been at the company a couple of years, and but I've been in e-commerce for about 24 years. So a long kind of tenure. And I've worked with brands of all sizes, from SMBs, mid-market to enterprise, in almost every vertical. And it's been really, really exciting to kind of see how commerce is applied to merchants of all shapes, sizes, and industries, especially in B2B and B2C. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and I really like the mission of this podcast, to kind of speak plainly about technology, because I think this is one of the big things I've seen is how effective big technology companies have been at creating marketing buzzwords and really creating a lot of confusion in the market. So my mission at Shopware is to make sure that we're speaking plainly and we're giving people the technology they need to solve business problems. And if we can't do that, we send them to somebody else. But that's kind of the mission. That's why I'm excited to be on the call.
Right on. And so in the e-commerce landscape, I think we kind of all know the big players, Shopify and BigCommerce and WooCommerce, and then Salesforce has their stuff, and SAP has some solutions. Open source, SaaS, PaaS, all these words that I think sometimes on premise get people composable. And I think all of us in the industry have an idea of what all those words mean. But within that kind of what is Shopware, with that kind of background, how would you describe Shopware and versus, let's just say, a pure SaaS solution?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, this is actually one of my favorite topics, because we today at Shopware, just as a background, you got to have complexity for us to be a good fit. Okay, you just have to. And I'll start with the multi-tenant SaaS kind of providers in the industry, and there's some really world-class companies. Shopify, BigCommerce, Salesforce are world-class commerce clouds. They're great. They're amazing. That's the right fit for roughly 60% of the e-commerce market. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the commerce tools of the world, the Composable, the inventors of the Mock Alliance. That is the absolute perfect solution for the 1% club, the biggest 1% of companies in the world with huge budgets, complexities, and desire to control. Okay, Shopware fits right there in the middle. So we have roughly 40% of the market is a good fit for us. But again, you have to have some dimension of you have to have some dimension of complexity. And complexity can come in the form of brands that you operate under. It could come in terms of the numbers of countries you manage, the size of your catalog. It could come in workflows and use cases you need supported. You could be in regulated industries. But our mission at Shopware is to serve the mid-market, and it's specifically the merchants with complexities. There's plenty of low complex merchants who are doing tons of revenue, who are the perfect fit for Shopify, and they've got them, and they'll have more of them. And so I think it's really important, for a platform provider to be able to tell the person you're in the room with, we're a good fit for you, or we're not.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing that can happen in a tech world is you get a customer and then they attrit because you're not the right fit. So we pay a lot of attention around making sure that our ideal customer is the one we're trying to sell to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the question now with the kind of post-COVID era we're in, where you had the COVID bump and then the COVID hangover, a lot of people scrambling to get into e-commerce as fast as possible. maybe re-platforming off of some older systems. I think the dust has kind of settled from that craziness, and people are looking at, okay, what's the best long-term solution for me? How can I use this platform to kind of adapt to my business versus my business having to adapt to the platform so much? And then there's kind of the issue with take rate. So how do I get into how do I do the math on the take rate? We can get into that for a second.
Yeah.
But just for people that might be, new to this field, SaaS is software as a service. And basically what we're saying is, here's a box, you can put your products in there, and you can sell your products in this shopping box. And it does what it does, and it doesn't do other things easily. Now, there's ways to hack it and customize it, but by default, and the most value you're going to get out of the SaaS solution is you do what it does, and that's it. Once you get outside of the parameters of that system, that's my view. So when on the agency side of my life, when I'm not doing the Varato podcast, we do a lot of B2B, and we do a lot of customizations. So when you're looking at a B2B platform, you're thinking, how can I accommodate this? How can this platform accommodate my business and my business rules? And maybe we change some of these or flex them, but then I don't know what 5 years is going to look like. So how do I have faith around this is something that can scale with me and can accommodate my needs? And so I think now that the dust has settled, people are also going to be looking at replatforming again, but they're like, I don't want to do it again. I want to replatform into something that I know is going to satisfy my business requirements and be essentially as future-proof as possible. We all know that that's impossible. You can't be completely future-proof, but this is something that I'm going to be able to scale with and grow with over the next 5 to 10 years. So now that I prompted that one up, Jason, and I'll try not to talk the whole time, but with that in mind, kind of where do you see Shopware fit? And also, where do you see some of the challenges that have a lot of businesses haven't quite overcome yet? Because frankly, there's a lot of mid-market businesses that haven't gotten into the e-commerce game yet.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. The first thing I'll say is we're in kind of this next big wave of replatforming, and we have a front row seat to it. Magento was one of the greatest commerce platforms ever invented. And this was, a decade ago. And by the way, Demandware was pretty great, and Hybris were pretty great. And all three of those got acquired by bigger companies, Adobe, Salesforce, and SAP. And what they effectively did is they raised the bar for who, or changed the ICP as to who those products were built for. And I mean, they did an amazing job of upgrading all those products to basically serve the upper end of the enterprise down to the lower end of the enterprise. But make no mistake, they know how to sell to and deliver for enterprises. Mm-hmm. And what that ultimately did is it left this big unmet need for the people in the middle. We call it the flyover states of e-commerce, the mid-market merchant. And so your choice is really, do I want to take my business and kind of force it into a box that is purpose-built to do business the way it's meant to do, in this scenario, Shopify? Or do we make material investments because we believe so deeply that this is our future, and so we're going to overinvest and buy something we probably can't afford, shouldn't buy, and take a long time to deliver? If you're sitting in the hands of in the chair of a mid-market merchant, that's kind of what you feel. Do I cram in or overbuy? And so Shopware's mission is to really serve that mid-market because we feel it's underserved. Now, back to your question around future-proof. One of the challenges, and one of the reasons I decided to join Shopware is because in my old life at Digital River, we were an app inside of the app store of Salesforce, Commerce Cloud, BigCommerce, Adobe, all these companies, and we were selling with them. So I got a front row seat to how they sold, how they priced, how they packaged, and how they delivered. And one of the things that was striking to me is how similar all of the capabilities that all these platforms had. It was a mountain of sameness. It was just about packaging and using different language for a lot of the same things. And I started to really wonder why. And it wasn't until I met Shopware and actually got the demo to become an executive at the business, I wanted to see the product. And what I realized is that we had this massive execution advantage because our product launched in December of 2019. So it's basically a 4.5, 5-year-old product. Okay. Coming up on 5. Everybody we compete with, their product is 15 to 20 years old. Now, they hide that from you because it's multi-tenant SaaS. So they're responsible for the upgrades and the maintenance. But what we found is what I suspect they're finding is that the lion's share of the money they spent in R&D is actually sustained engineering or refactoring to take advantage of mobile commerce, social commerce, marketplaces, composable, headless, all the things we've been talking about. Okay. So because that's the case, because we have a modern code base and we kind of tried to borrow the lessons, learned by the Magento ecosystem, we are building out features and functions at a rate and pace nobody else is. And so we feel very confident when you talk about future proofing that we have AI built into the product and we were the first and we still have the most. We feel very confident that we're going to deliver next gen e-commerce experience with things like spatial commerce, where you'd allow you to rotate a product, zoom in, zoom out, and really interact with it as opposed to a flat experience. We got these other capabilities called rules and flow builder, which are incredible, and on and on and on. I don't want to bore you, but the utility that we can provide to merchants is significantly stronger than anybody we compete with. And so for that reason, we feel really good about the conversation around future proofing because we've got a little bit of a head start.
Yeah. Or even like a late start. Like you could,
second mover advantage.
Yeah, totally. It's like that old Willie Nelson song, Willie Nelson joke, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese.
I like it. 100% true.
Yeah. Yep. So let me just repeat what you said and kind of break it down so that maybe someone who's, new to this might understand it. And this has been my experience because I've been in this game for almost 30 years, and we were building e-commerce systems from scratch back in the early days in the 90s. But imagine that you're in your workshop and you're building a machine by hand, and you keep adding pieces on, and then you're test driving it, and then you add more pieces on, and you need your windows to roll up and you want your convertible top to close. And you end up with this incredible car that you spent 20 years on, and everything you've learned, you're telling yourself, man, if I could start over and build another one from scratch, I would have, this would have fit into that. And I didn't need this piece. And these two things could have been one piece. And I think that's what happens with software is that, like we said, we don't know what 5 years from now looks like or 10 years from now is going to look like. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to want to add in that give us a lot of value and give our customers a lot of value. Because it's all about that customer experience, right? Sometimes the older companies are at a disadvantage. They've been doing it the same way, and they've essentially created what we call in the industry a monolith, which has all these dependencies. And so it's really hard to continue to scale it because every time you want to add something in. And by the way, sometimes it's not the engineers that are driving those decisions. It's the sales team and the business units that are driving those decisions. And they're saying, hey, we need to have this other thing added on. And the engineers were like, well, we didn't really plan for that. And the business units are like, well, do it anyway. And so
still need it.
Yeah, right. So now you kind of end up with a cluster, and that's why sometimes you got to reset and refresh. Some of the open source systems, have been through this over and over again. WordPress, you kind of have to, we used to say refactoring, but sometimes you got to almost strip it down and build again, strip it down, build again. So, and it's hard to do that on a SaaS platform where everyone's in on the same thing. Everyone's running off the same engine. It's really hard to rebuild that engine. You got to stop doing business, right?
Nut by nut, bolt by bolt. 100%
Yeah.
agree. It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Which is why if you take a look at some of these other kind of classically big multi-tenant SaaS commerce platforms, they still have some of the original code running the commerce platform. And it's been 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with your point.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I was out with, you know, I met with the founder of Odoo a couple months ago, you know, just had a lot of people in the room. He was answering questions. People were lobbing questions at him. So I lobbed a question at him and I said, how do you keep from this becoming a monolith? You know, you're trying to do all these things. And he said, well, right now I'm in control. I am an engineer. I started this and I can decide. And we have a lot of functionality that we're bringing to the market that was following a logical sequence to add to and was planned for, not something that came from left field that the business units added in. And so we've been, from the very beginning, planning to create a fairly broad piece of software. So with that in mind, so how does, you know, I realized 2019, that's only 5 years ago. That's a pretty fresh, start. What are you guys looking at for, you know, the next 5 years? Anything exciting and you know, what's the roadmap look like and the durability of the tech you're building?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a technologist, even though I play one on TV. We are heavily influenced by our partner agencies we work with that have their feet on the ground dealing with customers. And we seek out the advice as to what the market needs and wants. And so number one, I think we just embrace market feedback really well. Number two, we have 50,000 clients in almost every vertical. And one of the universal truths at Shopware is we are not going to try and be everything to everyone. We are not trying to run around with a hammer and make everything look like a nail. Our goal is to build, 80% of what most people want and give them the ability to customize the 20% they need. Okay. And that's different than other people. Other people try to get you to 100% and force you into that box. That's not our world. We want your business to be able to change and move. So we're investing big in AI. I talked about this a little bit, but we've got our view on AI as an example is I've never met an e-commerce manager or anyone at an agency who can get through all of the things they're supposed to do, all of their priorities. Okay. There's a lot of blue collar work being done by white collar people in e-commerce. So our mission is to make e-commerce a lot simpler to execute. So we happen to be very lucky in this regard. We're a sister company of OpenAI. OpenAI's biggest investor is Carlyle Group, same with Shopware. Okay. So we get a front row seat. We have a license with OpenAI, but our goal is to basically integrate AI into every function that an e-commerce manager does to run a store. How you generate images, product descriptions, how you categorize, how you summarize reviews, how you do every function. And the e-commerce manager's job goes from someone who has to cut and paste a whole bunch of different things at a bunch of different times to being an approver. And that makes them incredibly more efficient. So, our mission might sound weird, but our goal is to take out the cost of commerce as you scale. And if you look at some of these multi-tenant SaaS competitors, so the Shopifys of the world, if you do a certain amount of revenue and you double, your cost of commerce doubles. Okay, that's not the case with Shopware. The cost of doing commerce as your business scales actually stays flat to goes down. And that's a big differentiator. So our whole model is making commerce better, faster, and cheaper. And whatever that means to do it, that's where we invest.
Right. And what do you see are some of the bigger frictions that you guys are helping merchants solve that maybe other platforms weren't?
Well, there's a couple. I'm going to start with this utility we have called Rule and Flow Builder. And it's unique. I don't know if anyone has it. There's probably apps you can add on to some other companies to get close. But what this does is effectively, most people have the context of, I want to create a campaign, which allows me to set a price for a specific action. So it's an if-then statement that kind of exists in the context of discounting. Okay. Well, we took that same concept and we blew it out and we apply it to all aspects of commerce. So in a B2B context, actually, I'll use a B2C one. You're selling a regulated product, there are rules around who can buy that product, how it can be shipped, how it is taxed, and all of that, what it can be bought with or what it can't be. And all of these are rules inside of the rules engine that Shopware orchestrates to basically allow people to buy the products they're eligible to buy, when they're eligible to buy, the price they're eligible to buy, and it's all orchestrated through the system. And that's Rule Builder. So it takes something that was very narrowly defined as rules for promotion in other platforms and apply it to all other aspects of commerce. And that utility normally exists inside of a custom app that someone built outside of their commerce system, or in JavaScript on the page that's trying to make these things happen because some business person came up with the idea. Or it sits in the ERP. When you try to place the order, the system rejects it. And so we get a tremendous amount of efficiency because it puts the hand around compliance in the hands of the marketer or the e-commerce manager. So that's really empowering. So that'd be one example, Matt, I'd point to.
And an example of that might be someone, let's say, selling wine.
Wine's perfect, or CBD, or hunting equipment.
Or hunting equipment, right?
Yeah,
and you can,
And, so the hunting example is you can't buy, you can buy certain types of weapons in and ship it to LA County, but you can't buy others. And so it's restricted by catalog, zip code. You have to ship it via a certain mechanism. You can't do it via standard. So it's all these rules that make commerce really, really complex, but done right, make it really, really efficient.
Yeah, and I guess tobacco is probably one of those too.
It is.
Yeah, and I imagine that's where you kind of have a barrier to entry, complexity, where if you can solve it,
Yes,
you're going to be able to kind of win some of the market from your competition who either has chosen not to solve it because it's too complex or it's too expensive for them to solve it. Right.
Well, let's talk about the incentives to solve it, because I think that's really important. So, number one, we're having a unbelievable amount of success in what we're calling regulated industries. So healthcare, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, you name it. If it's regulated, we have an enormous right to win and an advantage. Okay, so that's been really, really good. But the profit motive for our competition to solve it is actually competes with it. And so let me tell you what I mean. And we'll take the hunting firearm example. If you're Shopify, again, unbelievable company, just had their earnings, they crushed it. They make 72% of the money they make on payments. Okay. The payments industry is incredibly restrictive as to the products they allow you to sell. It has everything to do with the value chain around acquiring and all. It doesn't matter. Basically, a payment provider can say, I don't want you to sell that product, therefore you're turned off. Right. And in Shopify's case, products in this category, restricted goods, are the most likely to get turned off by the payment provider. So in other words, Shopify's financial model kind of breaks down serving that industry. It also gets worse because all of these kind of true cloud providers also have hosting partners. So AWS, GCP, Azure, et cetera. And if those folks decide they want to be in that vertical, well, then you're out of business. You can't sell online using that platform. So just the sheer amount of risk as anybody in these regulated industries take, payment risk, hosting risk, and frankly, the last one is platforms, online terms and conditions. They could turn you off anytime. Yeah. So it's kind of because that case that this rule and flow builder financially makes a lot of sense for a merchant, but also the technology solves a meaningful use case.
Yeah. I can see how that would really come in handy too, outside of the regulated industries, but just in B2B, where you might have a manufacturer selling to original equipment, OEMs, and they have to keep really strict partitions around what can be seen by whom and at what price, right?
100%. Most of our pipeline is B2B, and 60% of our company's clients are in B2B. Again, back to my original statement, you kind of need complexity to be a great fit for Shopware, and complexity shows up a lot in B2B.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, on the agency side, that's that's where we've kind of earned our stripes, is in the complexity side, and mapping to ERP and mapping to pre-existing business rules. And sometimes those business rules are complicated, but they're also that company's advantage, right?
They're complicated for a reason.
Right.
Exactly.
And so if you eliminate their advantage, they're not going to want they're not going to want to hear about your solution. They have to keep that advantage in place, and then you have to work with it, right?
Well, let me add on to that. So the other thing that we have that really, really is a differentiator in B2B is this thing called the digital sales room. And it's unbelievable because what this is, I should explain it, is we believe it will do to e-commerce, or is doing to e-commerce, what telehealth has done to healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
What's it done to healthcare? 73% of all hospitals today in the United States have a telehealth option. Okay. Its usage is somewhere in the 10 to 20% range of all doctors' visits are done virtually. Okay. Not 100%, but somewhere in the 20% range. If you apply that to B2B commerce, the real unlock in B2B commerce is not the consumerization of B2B, where you put up a website where your long tail can purchase and your rebuys happen, and it's this self-service channel for B2B. Yes, that's nice. Yes, that matters. Yes, merchants, brands should do it. But the 90% unlock is when you can actually help the reps make more money. And this digital sales room, much like telehealth, is a tool they can spin up and create a curated session for the merchant with the video, co-browsing the same store at same times in different spots, up to 100 customers with one seller, and the rep having God view. These products are available in these locations. You bought these before. These are the high margins. These are the add-ons. And it's this unbelievably interactive experience that reps don't use for their top 10 accounts. They use it for their underserved 40.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the real unlock on how you merge classic B2B salespeople who've been resistant to e-commerce. You will only use it to help them make more money. That's the big unlock, to serve the underserved.
Yeah, that rings so true to me. We always talk about when you get involved with a company and you're doing a digital transformation project, a B2B e-commerce project, an ERP implementation project, whatever it is.
Yep.
Know who your allies are, know who your advocates are, know who your stakeholders are, and most importantly, know who the gatekeepers are. There's gatekeepers that are going to want to keep that project from happening because it puts them at risk, or they don't want the disruption. For some reason, they don't want this to happen. A lot of times it's the sales teams in B2B e-commerce. They feel like they're at risk. Now, if you can make them part of the solution and part of the process, and you can get them to become stakeholders in this, and you can show them how it can make them money, most importantly, now you got a huge win. And I think this is what's, when I heard about this, the lights went off for me, because I think you're right, Mike. This might be one of the next big hurdles to get over in terms of friction and adoption in B2B e-commerce.
Totally. And even the term channel conflict and the way that we've dealt with it is basically do it anyway and tell people to stop whining. I mean, that's been the solution to channel conflict. The solution that I'm recommending is digital sales room is no such thing as channel conflict. This is a tool that you can use to make more money. If you choose not to, that's also fine.
Yeah.
So it's a channel choice as opposed to channel conflict.
Well, imagine this too. Like, so we're talking with a business. They sell B2B. They have 99 sales reps across the entire country. And the sales reps have the relationship with the customer. It's a product that they repurchase over and over again. And they have no way for those customers to self-service those orders without going through that sales rep or are calling into the main office. And I was thinking, well, what if you could put a tool in front of that sales rep where you get in front of that customer and say, okay, what's your cadence? How often do you want to buy? Let's get a few orders prepped up for you. Now you can reorder for pretty easily. You don't have to call me. You don't have to call the main office, but that sales rep keeps getting a commission on those reorders, right?
Love it. I love it. Yeah. You've solved both problems.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now it's better for the customer, it's better for the sales rep, and it's a lot better for the business. Right.
100%.
Yeah. I could see a need for that a lot, but even just with businesses that I've come across in the last year.
I'm actually curious. You said something earlier in the podcast around revenue share. And I think there's been some changes over the last, call it decade, that merchants have been kind of the frog in the pot where the water gets turned up and it's now boiling.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know it or feel it because it's a series of things as opposed to one. One of those to me is revenue share. I'd love to hear your take on that, and then I'll kind of share mine.
Well, I revenue share. You mean I think I use the term take rate.
Take rate, same thing.
Take rate, yeah. So, yeah, I think it's take rate and then like vendor lock in. I think those are the big concerns, right? And those are big concerns with SaaS and yeah. So, again, not to crap on Shopify. I mean, if I was a merchant and I was starting up a business and I was making a consumer product, I would go with Shopify. Yeah. There's a million reasons to go with Shopify. It's great. And there's a reason they're winning. Because it's so easy and fast to get up and running. However, it's basically it's a financial services technology. It's a fintech. So what you're doing is you're buying an online cash register. And every order that goes through that online cash register, they're going to get their take rate, which is part of their, credit card fees, that most merchants can't get out of. But what happens if you're selling B2B and everything goes through a purchase order or on terms or with credit? You don't need a credit card, or ACH. You don't need a credit card. So how does Shopify's business model now work for those kinds of businesses? That's one. And then the other one, if you're going to scale, it's one thing to keep 3% or 3.5% of every order when you're doing 10 million. When you're doing 100 million, that becomes pretty like, yeah, maybe we should rethink this. All of a sudden, we can afford a replatforming, right? There's money on the table for a replatforming. If we can remove that take rate from 3.5 to 2.5, and we're a $50 million business, right? That by itself might pay for that replatforming easily. And then that's just profits the year after. So
totally. Well, I love that point. You nailed it. And I always say Shopify gives a $1 million merchant the scale of a $25 million merchant.
Mm-hmm.
But a $100 million merchant gets the financial scale of a $25 million merchant.
Right.
These are effectively subsidizing the rest, which is great.
Yeah.
Again, I'm with you. If I had to start a business from scratch, I'd probably either go Squarespace or Shopify. Their tools are so great. But if I'm a mature business with meaningful volume and meaningful complexity, then a revenue share is a tax, or a take rate is a tax on my growth. Very few other technologies in the world have been able to associate your revenue with a take rate.
Mm-hmm.
Very few.
Yeah. And and in some of our B2B clients, we'll host their systems ourselves. Everything goes through as an order request. There are no credit card transactions. We're using the software to create order flow, but the dollar amount of that order flow, that's proprietary information. I don't think the software vendor needs to know.
Why do they need to know?
Yeah, why do you need to know? Yeah.
If you and tell me, and this is where I'm on the battle against the rev share, is if there are elements of your cost to deliver your product are actually services based. So the hosting is a really good example. Like these spikes have real costs, right?
Right.
It's a utility. But the software itself, at some point, there's a cost of that utility. And it's not as variable as the usage or the payment volume of the platform. And so this is a big way that Shopware differentiates is we have a fixed license model where we lock in your price over multiple years so you know the cost of commerce and you can capitalize that expense. And so for merchants who are distributors or people who are in low margin segment businesses, you don't have to pay for commerce as an OpEx expense.
Mm-hmm.
You can pay for it out of CapEx.
Yeah.
Which means you can afford to actually sell a 4.5% margin product and make money on it because you're not giving 10 or 15% of that away to somebody who's helping you operate the transaction.
Exactly. And I think that's when things have gotten tricky. And then, this is what it's a perfect conversation to define mid-market too, because, again, like you said, Shopify might be that $25 million platform that you can use as $1 million merchant. But then once you get into this order, and most of this order flow, honestly, in B2B is kind of some part of the wholesale supply chain game, right? Your business is buying from other businesses, business buying for suppliers, parts that are being assembled into products, kinds of thing. So those are really small margin transactions. So obviously that you can't deal, the 3.5 isn't going to work, right? Yep. And then there's the enterprises, the billion-dollar companies that have already got their supply chain models sorted with EDI and these other systems. And that could be probably streamlined and modernized, but mostly they have their relationships and their order flows are decades old, and that is kind of working. We would argue it could be working better, but it's working, right? Yep. What I'm also seeing, though, is those larger enterprises starting to think more like entrepreneurial. How could we break this into a smaller mid-market businesses? So we might be this huge global enterprise.
Totally.
Well, let's take one piece of this enterprise and run it like a mid-market business, and then we'll bring in a Shopware and we'll tool it up for this one solution, and then maybe we can scale from there and roll that into some of our other departments.
100% agree. We see that all the time. We have 50,000 clients. We're the 7th largest commerce platform in the world by GMV. And when we analyze our customer base, you start to see some really big names, Mercedes-Benz and Toyota and Volvo in the car space, or, it doesn't matter. But when you dig into it, what happens is actually there's divisions inside of these companies that simply can't execute like a big company. They have to execute more agile and have systems of differentiation. And Shopware becomes an answer to that with this rule and flow builder, with this digital sales room, with how AI is brought in. And the fact that it's a fixed license model as opposed to a rev share just makes a lot of sense for businesses that are kind of underserved by today's market leaders.
Yeah. I think there's frictions on both sides. Frictions for the small business is I don't have the funds to build a digital transformation platform or game plan. And for the large enterprises, it's I'm too big and it's too big of a ship to turn.
That's right.
So the small business can turn on a dime, but they don't have any fuel. Right. So exactly. I think they're both trying to be mid-market businesses, right? In a way. Another thing to just kind of throw out there, this is a side note, but I know there's a lot of money in the United States, and I'm sure this is globally, for at least in the manufacturing space or just in the supply chain space, let's say, to invest in digital transformation. And so we've been seeing this. I'm going to devote some other podcasts to this, but for those small businesses out there that think I can't afford this, do a little research. There's some money out there for you. And sometimes up to 50% of these project costs can get covered. A big chunk of the training costs can get covered. And there's also some kind of SBA loans and stuff out there too. But, I worry about the small businesses. That's where my heart is. My heart is with the small businesses. And I'd hate to see that the digital transformation process over the next 5 or 10 years, either forces companies to go out of business or to sell, and that consolidation, it removes a lot of, unique options from the marketplace. I think those two things might both happen simultaneously. There might be some smaller businesses that can't keep up,
Yeah.
But there's also going to be some new businesses that prop up that didn't exist before. So you're going to see diversity in the marketplace, transition. Yep. This is going to be a lot of disruption and change, but I think that's good. I think that's healthy, and that's why I have this podcast, is because I think you know, talking about how things are changing, how businesses are changing, what the options are, the way the industry like e-commerce is rethinking. You know, how do we bring best-in-class solutions to the table? How can I win out over some of my competition to address these needs? Now that we can see them, and now we're getting a feedback from merchants, so it's you know, it's an exciting time.
It really is, and let me just add on to that point really quick. You know, we're pretty used to some of the biggest names in each of these technology providers. So Shopify in e-commerce, and Avalara in tax, and you know, you name it as the front end, and you name it for search. But we're starting to see this next generation of technology companies who are all started with a clean sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in you talked about Odoo. I always say it wrong. They're a clean sheet of paper company. They're great.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about Zamp, Z-A-M-P in taxes. These guys are disrupting Avalara. Different pricing model. They're great. Site Improve is disrupting kind of search. Shopware is disrupting the mid-market e-commerce industry, and Expand Now is a company that does cross-border. It's going after the global ease and e-shop worlds of the world. So I think it's a really interesting time for the small businesses and the mid markets to really take a look at the next generation of tools, because I think it'll unlock a bit of a competitive advantage. You'll be paying less and getting more, which is really how small businesses and mid-market businesses compete with their Goliath competitors.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's also a good reason to keep things somewhat decoupled, you know, because you might be able to attach on a piece that doesn't exist yet that could really like supercharge that customer experience. Because I think personally, given that I'm kind of been in this game for a while, I think the groundwork is set right now for a next generation of businesses and entrepreneurship to come in. And I think that if you look at the top 5 companies on the S&P 500, there might be one on that list in 10 years that doesn't even exist yet. Someone's building a business in their dorm room or their basement or their garage, and it'll be on the top of that list, and we don't even know the name of it yet. That's pretty exciting in my world.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Someone's going to be an overnight success 10 years later.
Yeah, and if you know that you're that person and you're looking for some investors, just kidding. Exactly. All right, cool. So Shopware, Jason, thanks so much. And is there anything else you have? I think we've gotten through a lot here.
No, I just want to say thank you. We're big fans of your other business. We're partners. We've got a shared customer too. We're on the right path. I got to tell you, your team is amazing. All the interaction I've had with them, the level of detail and focus and customer centricity is just really, really great. So keep up the good work, and thanks for including us in this podcast.
Awesome, Jason, so much. Thanks for coming on. We'll see you in the weeds of the industry, but thanks for taking a break and being on the podcast. I appreciate your thoughts and insight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.